It was a flying tank with unstoppable firepower that could even survive being sliced in half, and was so dangerous even the enemy wanted to fly them. But was it a masterpiece of military engineering or a brute of the skies? The B-17 Flying Fortress, genius or junk? Let's rewind to the 1930s. The US Army Air Corps put out a call for a long-range, multi-engine bomber. Boeing answered with the Model 299. A sleek, 4-engine prototype, unlike anything in the air at the time. It was fast, it was powerful, and it could carry a serious payload. Even after a crash during testing, the Army was still impressed. They saw potential. That prototype became the B-17, and from day one, it was built around one bold idea: fly high, fly fast, and shoot back hard enough that you didn't need a fighter escort. That's where the guns come in. When Seattle Times journalist Richard Smith first laid eyes on its formidable armament, you can see why he exclaimed, "Why, it's a flying fortress!" A nickname that was going to stick. 13.50 caliber machine guns, mounted in nearly every direction: nose, tail, sides, top, and the infamous belly ball turret. A B-17 wasn't just a bomber, it was a floating porcupine. The goal? Creating a self-defending formation of bombers that could punch through German airspace. But here's the problem: it didn't always work. Despite all that firepower, bomber crews faced horrific losses, especially before long-range fighter escorts like the P-51 Mustang came along. On some missions, 1 out of every 4 B-17s never made it back. Then there's the idea of precision bombing. The B-17 was designed for daylight missions, to hit factories, rail lines, and strategic targets with pinpoint accuracy. Sounds great in theory, but in practice, not so much. High winds, enemy flak, cloud cover, and bombs dropped from 25,000 feet. It was nearly impossible to hit small targets consistently. Entire city blocks were flattened while trying to knock out a single bridge. Precision bombing in the 1940s was mostly wishful thinking. But if the B-17 had one undeniable strength, it was durability. This machine could take a beating, and somehow keep flying. Photos from the war showed B-17s limping back to base, with engines destroyed, tails shredded, holes big enough to walk through, and yet they made it back. And if the B-17 was tough in the air, it was just as impressive on the ground. This was no small aircraft. A B-17 measured 74 feet long, with a wingspan of 103 feet, wider than many modern passenger jets. It stood over 19 feet tall, about the height of a 2-story house. Empty, it weighed more than 30,000 pounds, and, fully loaded, it could top 55,000 pounds of steel, bombs, and fuel. And yet, the most amazing stat isn't its size. It's how fast America built them. At the peak of wartime production, factories rolled out a brand new B-17 every hour of every day. That's 24 bombers a day, thousands each year. By the end of the war, more than 12,500 B-17s had been produced. It wasn't just a bomber, it was an industrial miracle. And when people talk about the toughness of the B-17, there's one story that always comes up: the All-American. It was February the 1st, 1943. The All-American was returning from a bombing mission over North Africa. Suddenly, a German fighter rammed it mid-air, shearing off the rear stabilizer and almost slicing the fuselage in half. The entire tail section was hanging by just a few metal beams. The crew braced for a fatal dive, but somehow, incredibly, the aircraft held together. The pilots flew the crippled bomber for over an hour and landed it safely in Algeria. No parachutes, no crash. Everyone survived. This was not just an isolated story. Crew after crew told tales of miraculous survival. The truth? Yes, the airframe was rugged. Yes, its design saved lives. But it was still a bomber in a brutal war. For every fortress that limped home, many more were lost over Europe. So how did the B-17 really stack up? Let's compare. The B-24 Liberator, it flew farther, it carried more bombs. The British Lancaster, it dropped the biggest bombs of the war, even the Grand Slam. And the B-29 Super Fortress, pressurized cabin, remote control guns, it ended the war over Japan. By comparison, the B-17 wasn't the fastest, or the most heavily armed, or the most advanced, but it was reliable, easy to build, and it got the job done. And here's something you might not expect. The B-17 wasn't only flown by the Allies. The Luftwaffe, Germany's air force, captured dozens of damaged or crash-landed B-17s. They patched them up, repainted them with German markings, and flew them. These captured B-17s were used for espionage, infiltration, and testing. To the Luftwaffe, the B-17 wasn't just a threat. It was valuable enough to steal, study, and fly. So, was the B-17 a genius of engineering, or an overrated relic of a flawed strategy? The answer isn't simple. The B-17 was a symbol, a tool, a weapon forged for a very specific moment in history. It was never perfect, but it was dependable. And in a war where lives, time, and steel were thrown into the fire, dependability mattered more than perfection. So, what do you think? B-17, genius or junk?